Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Odyssey Recaps Below the Surface Edition. Just a reminder that if you'd like a shorter, shallower, and slightly sassier recap, head on over to my Just the Tea recaps. But for now, let's dive in. So today, we are recapping chapter, or book, 9, titled by Emily Wilson as A Pirate in a Shepherd's Cave. This chapter opens on wily Odysseus, the Lord of Lies, who is about to tell the Phaeacian court who he is and what he did before washing ashore in their island. This opening is fascinating. From the very first line, we are reminded that Odysseus is a trickster and a liar. He is not to be trusted. Before he even begins to speak, we're questioning his story. Of course, the listening Phaeacians don't get this warning, but we, the second audience, are left wondering if he will tell the truth here, or if the Lord of Lies is about to spin another careful tale. Odysseus tells the gathered Phaeacians that it will hurt him to tell his sad story, but he will do so, despite the pain. He begins with who he is. He tells them, "I am Odysseus, Laertes' son, known for my many clever tricks and lies. My fame extends to heaven, but I live in Ithaca." Now we have a second reveal. Odysseus has told the Phaeacians that he is a trickster and a liar. Is this him acknowledging his well-known reputation, or is it an attempt to disarm with painful honesty? Either way, we have been told over and over that Odysseus chooses his words carefully to elicit specific responses. And keep in mind that Athena is still making him appear more charming and godlike than most humans. To the Phaeacians, it would seem like this shining hero stepped right out of myth and song and into their dining halls. Liar or not, the audience is hanging on to his every word. Odysseus tells them of his home, Ithaca, and how much he loves it. He tells them he was trapped by two magical women, the goddess Calypso and the witch Circe. Both confined him to their island homes, hoping to marry him, but neither could sway his heart, since when a man is far from home, living abroad, there is no sweeter thing than his own native land and family. Odysseus goes on to say that Zeus himself has delayed his return. He was on his way home from Troy when he was pushed off course to the Cicones, where he sacked the town and killed the men, and he and his men took their wives and shared their riches amongst themselves. At this point, Odysseus said they should take their ill-gotten gains and run away, but his foolish men refused to listen. They wanted to enjoy their spoils before leaving. While they were drinking excessively and feasting, some of the conquered Cicones managed to call on their neighbors to come and rout the invaders. Odysseus said, "Then Zeus gave us bad luck, poor us." The neighbors came and fought them, eventually overpowering them and driving them off. Odysseus isn't hiding his violent and colonizing nature, and we're left to wonder if it's because as a warrior he sees this as simply his job, or if there is an inherent violence to this man who is so frequently covered in the blood of innocents. Emily Wilson, in her introduction to this poem, reminds us that Odysseus is a complex figure, and that this poem is clear that he is not an innocent hero stuck between the whims of the gods. He is a man who makes choices that frequently lead to the deaths or enslavement of men, women, and children. This isn't a simple story, and Odysseus isn't a simple man. Think of the listening Phaeacians, hearing about him being blown into an island and choosing to conquer the local people. The Cicones were an ally of Troy, but is that why Odysseus sacked them? Or is it just because he could? The listening Phaeacians might wonder, if Odysseus had come upon their island with a ship and an army, would they have met the same fate as the Cicones? Is there inherent difference between their peoples, or is it simply that this time Odysseus is alone and unarmed? Odysseus continues his tale. After being chased off by the neighbors of the Cicones, Odysseus and his surviving men are caught in a typhoon sent by Zeus, and after days of rough weather and being blown around, they come to the island of the Lotus Eaters. Odysseus sends 2 men and 1 slave to go and scout the island. They come across some humans, the Lotus Eaters, who share their sweet, delicious fruit with them. But the fruit is magical, and upon eating it, they lose the will to return to the ship. They wanted only to stay there, feeding on lotus with the Lotus Eaters. They have forgotten home. Odysseus drags them back to the ship himself. They are in tears, not wishing to leave, but he forces them onto the ship and ties them up, and they set sail before any more of his men can be enchanted. They sail on until they reach the island home of the Cyclopses, who Odysseus describes as lacking in customs. The Cyclopses don't engage in agriculture, instead relying on the gods to give them barley, grain, and grapes for wine, which all grow on their island with no intervention from the Cyclopses. They don't have laws or government and operate individually as families and not as a collective. They also don't engage in seafaring and thus don't trade or visit other cultures. Odysseus talks about the wasted opportunities for colonization or greater agricultural production. Essentially, he doesn't think that they're exploiting the natural resources of their home and are wasting opportunities. This is talked about more by Emily Wilson in her introduction, so let me know if you want me to go into greater detail about this. Anyway, Odysseus and his men land on a small island filled with wild goats that lies right next to the Cyclops' island. They kill many goats and feast on them. The next day, Odysseus says he will take a small party and go see what type of people the Cyclopses are. Odysseus and his men row across to the Cyclops' island and find a home made in a cave, inhabited by giant Cyclops shepherds. The shepherd is out tending his flock, and Odysseus and 12 of his men go into his cave home and look around. They see crates of cheeses and pens filled with lambs divided by age, and a dairy-like setup with milking and cheese-making equipment. His crew begs him to let them steal some cheese and all the lambs and leave immediately. But Odysseus refuses, hoping to meet the Cyclopses and see if he will give them any gifts instead. This, he says, was a mistake. While they wait for the Cyclops to return, they light a fire, make a sacrifice, and eat some of the shepherd's cheese. Eventually, the Cyclops comes home, but Odysseus and his men are frightened and hide in the back of the cave. The Cyclops takes care of his flock, and once they're all settled, he lifts up a giant stone so big that 22 strong carts pulled by horses or oxen couldn't hope to move it, and he blocks the entrance of the cave, sealing all of them inside. Then he begins to milk the ewes and reunite them with their babies and prepares for more cheesemaking. Once he had done all his chores, he lights a fire, and that's when he at last spots the intruders. He says, "Strangers, who are you? Where did you come from across the watery depths? Are you on business or roaming around without a goal, like pirates who risk their lives at sea to bring disaster to other people?" Odysseus and his men are filled with terror at his booming voice. But Odysseus answers that they are Greeks, come from Troy, where they had sacked the city and killed many people, and on their journey home have been swept off course by Zeus. He begs the Cyclops for shelter and gifts, saying that they are supplicants, and requests the guest friendship relationship laid down by Zeus. The Cyclops replies that they must either be fools or from somewhere very different, because the Cyclopses don't fear Zeus or any god. They are stronger than gods, and do the bidding of their own hearts. Then he asks Odysseus, "But are you going far in that fine ship of yours, or somewhere nearby?" Odysseus sees a trap, and lies to him, saying that Poseidon wrecked their ships on their island, and they are the only survivors. I'm going to read this next bit verbatim, because the imagery is fantastic. It is really gruesome though, so consider this a warning. If you don't want to be grossed out, stop here. So Odysseus has lied to the Cyclops about their numbers, claiming they were shipwrecked and barely survived. But he, the Cyclops, made no reply and showed no mercy. Leaping up high, he reached his hands towards my men, seized two, and knocked them hard against the ground like puppies, and the floor was wet with brains. He ripped them limb by limb to make his meal, then ate them like a lion on the mountains, devouring the flesh, entrails, and marrow bones, leaving nothing. Odysseus and his men are helpless, trapped in the cave, unable to escape. They have suddenly discovered that they are more like the sheep and goats penned next to them than the shepherd. They can do nothing but pray to Zeus to save them, and watch. The next bit reads, "When the Cyclops had filled his massive belly with his meal of human meat and unmixed milk, he lay stretched out amongst his flock." Odysseus sees an opportunity to leap on him and stab him in the liver, killing him, but then realizes that doing so would condemn them all to a slow death in the cave, as they can't possibly move the giant boulder blocking the entrance. They simply have to wait. Now, I'd like to take a quick moment for a side note here. Odysseus has told us how he has slaughtered men and sacked cities, so the gruesome sight before them can't be completely foreign to him. And yes, of course, there is a significant difference between warfare and being trapped with a monster who is eating your companions one by one. But there's another layer to this. The emphasis seems to be upon the disgust and horror at seeing their companions being devoured. And though the Cyclops is not human, there's definitely an air of cannibalism here, with the description of eating the flesh, entrails, and marrow adding layers of horror to an already terrifying situation. But there's something odd that stands out. Only 36 lines earlier, when Odysseus was introducing himself to the Cyclops, he specifically said, "We are proud to be the men of Agamemnon, the son of Atreus." The House of Atreus has a dark history of cannibalism, which I can go into greater detail about in another video if anyone is interested, but it seems an interesting connection to specifically mention being proudly aligned with a family known for acts of cannibalism and other transgressive acts of violence, and then being horrified by those same acts when done to them. Of course, the acts of cannibalism by the House of Atreus were punished by the gods and seen as horrific. But I think it's an interesting connection to be reminded of these acts so soon before witnessing them again in the flesh, as it were. Again, if anyone wants more detail on this, please let me know. I could talk about House of Atreus all day long. Anyway, back in the cave, Odysseus and his men spent a miserable night waiting for the Cyclops to awaken. When dawn finally breaks, the Cyclops wakes up and carefully tends to his flock before catching and eating another two of Odysseus's men. This time, it's described with a sort of horrible simplicity. He made a meal of them, and after he ate, he takes his flock out to pasture, whistling merrily, making sure to roll the boulder back in place when he leaves, trapping Odysseus and his remaining men inside. Odysseus is furious, planning revenge, wanting to hurt the Cyclops and gain the glory. He spots a giant club the size of a ship's mast in the corner and orders his men to help him cut some of it off and fashion it into a giant, stake or spear. They sharpen it, then put it in the fire to harden it, then hide it in the cave. They draw lots of who will help Odysseus to plunge it into the Cyclops' eye and blind him. Then they wait. That evening, the Cyclops comes home, settles his flock, then eats two more of Odysseus' men for dinner. After he's eaten his disgusting meal, Odysseus approaches him with a bottle of wine he had brought for the journey. He tells the Cyclops that he brought it as a holy offering, but the Cyclops may as well drink it to accompany his meal of human meat. The Cyclops drinks it and demands more, asking for Odysseus' name and promising him a present. Odysseus keeps giving him wine until the Cyclops is drunk and tells him that his name is No Man. The Cyclops responds, "I will eat no man last. First, I will eat the other men. That is my gift to you." A terrible perversion of the traditional gifts to guests from a host. After this, the Cyclops collapses. He fell on his back and lay there, his massive neck askew. All-conquering sleep took him. In drunken heaviness, he spewed wine from his throat and chunks of human flesh. Odysseus and his men retrieve the spear they've made and drive it into the embers of the fire until it began to burn. Terribly, it glowed. He pulls it from the fire, and he and the selected men take it and prepare themselves, and then they drive it hard into the Cyclops' eye. Odysseus lays on top and twists it. So round and round it goes, and so he whirled the fire-sharp weapon in his eye. His blood poured out around the stake, and blazing fire sizzled his lids and brows and fried the roots. He describes how the burning eyeball crackles on the spear, and how the Cyclops wakes and howls so loudly the rocks resound with the noise. The men shrink back in fear as the Cyclops pulls the spear from his eye, blood gushing out from the wound. He calls to the other Cyclopses who live in caves along the cliffs. They come to his door and call to him, calling him by the name Polyphemus, asking if he's hurt, if someone is attacking him. Polyphemus calls out, "My friends, no man is killing me by tricks, not force." The neighbors respond, "Well, if no one is hurting you, you're all alone. Great Zeus has made you sick. No help for that. Pray to your father, mighty Lord Poseidon." And then they leave. Odysseus laughs to himself at the success of his trick. The Cyclops groans and moves blindly to the doorway. He removes the stone and sits in the entrance, arm outstretched, ready to catch whoever exits the cave. But Odysseus has another plan. He takes the biggest rams from the Cyclops' flock and ties them together in groups of 3. Then he sets a man beneath each of the middle sheep, hiding them beneath all the sheep. Then he grabs the biggest and best ram from the flock and clings underneath him to his furry belly, hanging to his fleece by sheer force of will. And, I guess, arm strength. Then they wait miserably for daybreak. When dawn finally comes, the flock is bleeding. The rams need to be let out to pasture and the ewes need to be milked. Despite his agony, the Cyclops cares for them, slowly letting them out as he feels the back of each ram to make sure no human escapes with them. But he doesn't check beneath them. At last he gets to the biggest ram, his favorite, and tenderly asks why the ram is so slow today, when usually he is the first out of the cave in the morning. He says the ram must be sad for his master's blinded eye, and wishes the ram could talk and tell him where Odysseus is hiding so he can splatter his brains across the cave. Then he gently nudges the ram out to pasture, and Odysseus and his remaining men are free. Once they're away from the cave, Odysseus frees himself and then unties his men, and then they steal the flock, taking them and running back to the ship. The surviving men are horrified at the loss of their shipmates, but Odysseus does not give them time to grieve, making them shove the flock into the ships and cast off across the water. Now, if Odysseus had stopped here, it's possible he could have sailed home with his men with no interference from Poseidon. His trick had worked, he was free, and thanks to the trick, the Cyclops Polyphemus didn't know his name. But Odysseus couldn't leave it at that. Once they were out to sea, Odysseus turns back and shouts to the Cyclops, calling him an idiot, telling him he deserved what he got for eating guests. Polyphemus is enraged and rips rocks out of the mountainside and hurls them toward the sound of Odysseus' voice. The boulders fall all around them, Odysseus' men rowing hard to put more distance between the murderous Cyclops and the ship. Once they're farther out, Odysseus calls out to the Cyclops again. His men beg and plead with him to stop, to not antagonize the Cyclops anymore. They've barely escaped with their lives. But Odysseus says his tough heart was not convinced. He was still enraged, so he shouts again, telling the Cyclops if any mortal asks who blinded him, to say that it was Odysseus, the city sacker, Laertes' son, who lives in Ithaca, who destroyed his sight. Odysseus' desire for fame, glory, and vengeance has clouded his usually sharp judgment and set off a string of events that will doom his men and lead him to washing up alone on the shores of Phaeacia. The Cyclops groans, crying that the prophecy has come true. A soothsayer named Telemus had told him that he would be blinded by a man named Odysseus, but he thought Odysseus would be strong and tall and handsome and not a tiny weakling. He tells Odysseus to come back and he'll give him gifts and ask Poseidon to help him home. Poseidon is his father and will restore his sight. But Odysseus does not believe him and tells him he wishes he could send him to Hades, where he would never be cured and stay blind forever. Polyphemus holds out his arms to the heavens and prays to his father, saying, "Grant that Odysseus, the city sacker, will never go back home. Or if it is fated that he will see his family, then let him get there late and with no honor, in pain and lacking ships, and having caused the death of all his men, and let him find more trouble in his own house." Poseidon hears the prayer and grants it. Odysseus and his men reach the island where the rest of his fleet is hidden, and they share out the sheep. Odysseus takes the largest one, the special favorite of Polyphemus, for sacrifice. The poem reads, "There on the shore I slaughtered him for Zeus, the son of Cronos, god of dark clouds, lord of all the world. I burned the thighs. The god ignored my offering and planned to ruin all of my ships and all my loyal men." The chapter ends with Odysseus and his men feasting into the night. Then when dawn breaks, they set off once again across the sea, oblivious to the ruin Odysseus has brought on their heads. And that's where the chapter ends. Join us next time to see what happens next.